Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Andrew from DFA. Let's go ahead and get started. So this afternoon we'll be talking about budget. We'll be talking about budget management documents. And like I said this morning, if you did bar training a couple weeks ago, this module here is basically review and duplicate of that. But that's okay because, as I mentioned, also this stuff is really, really important to understand and to get right. So, happy that you're here again to get this one more time. And if you're new and weren't here, then welcome, and this will also be important for you as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, please type your questions into the chat. Keep your mics and cameras off, and we should be good to go. So what do I mean about when I say budget management documents? So these are documents that agencies prepare and submit to us, State Budget Division, during the fiscal year to adjust their budget somehow per authority that is given to them either by the legislature or by their statutes. So there are a few different types of these, and here you see kind of an overview of what we'll be talking about this afternoon. So the main type of these is the budget adjustment request, or BARs. And that's the most in-depth one, definitely the one we'll be spending the most time with this afternoon. We'll be talking about the types of BARs and authority, how to submit a complete BAR, and appropriate backup documentation. Then we'll be talking about how to budget non-recurring appropriations. Those are done through OPUD 4s. And if they're general fund or a computer fund, then you also need to submit an allotment form for those. We'll talk about a couple special cases, those being reauthorizations and companions. We'll talk about how to adjust non-recurring appropriations through the last type of budget management document that you submit to us, budget reallocation form, or BRF. And then last, we'll wrap up with creating budget projections. Projections are useful for BARs and some other documents, so we'll go over how to create and update those as well. Okay, so first, let's talk about the submission process for these documents, for BARs, OPUD 4s, and BRFs. So you'll create an email submission and you'll send it to the address that you see there, dfaspd.submissions. So that'll be routed to our office manager, and we have a backup if we have to, who can access that as well. We ask that you include an Excel version of the BAR, the OPUD 4, or the BRF. Okay, we asked for the Excel version because that's easy for us to edit and to mark off ourselves as it goes through our process. And then all of the backup documentation that you need to include, we ask that you put it together in one PDF document. So that way you just have the one Excel and the one PDF. We ask that you include an appropriate word in the email subject line that will aid in filtering. And that depends on the type of the document that you're using. So BAR for budget adjustment request, BRF for a reallocation form, or OPUD for non-recurring appropriation. And then once that all happens, our office manager or the backup will log it in, and they'll route it to the analyst for review. So that's how the submission process works. Next, just to pull back the curtain a little bit and let you know how these documents are reviewed within SBD after you submit them. So you see the steps outlined here. So number one on the left, that's kind of what we just talked about, where the office manager logs it into our system and gives it a control number. If it's a BAR, okay, a budget adjustment request, the director, that's me, does an initial review for appropriate use of funds and obvious issues. So I'm going to look at these and I'm going to take a look at the narrative. I'm going to make sure that what the agency is doing makes sense and is allowed. And obvious issues, mainly the statutory authority. This is one that I look at a lot when I do my initial review. Is does the agency have the statutory authority? Are they using the correct statutory authority to do what they say they want to do? So that's a big thing that I'm looking at there. If it's some sort of showstopper error that I see, then I'll probably talk to the analyst about it, and we'll reach out to the agency before we even begin the review. Or if it's something that isn't as bad, but I'll just flag it for, something for the analyst to address when they do their review. So after I do my initial review, it'll get routed to whoever your agency's analyst is. Okay, so they'll do their initial review of it. If they find any changes that need to be made, any technical errors or stuff like that, they will work with you. They'll email you, call you up, say, hey, here's this issue. I need to change something in the journal or something like that. And they'll work with you to make those needed revisions. After the initial analyst review, it'll go to their team lead. So every analyst in our office has a team lead. Even the team leads have team leads to basically review each other's work. So they just do a second review of the submission. They're looking for the same sorts of things. And again, if they find anything, then they'll go back to the initial analyst for changes. After that, it goes to me again for my final review, and I'll do my last review. If I'm good with it, then I will sign off on it. Once I sign off on it for anything other than non-federal bars, it's ready to move to step 5 and be posted. However, for non-federal bars, so basically any bar that involves money that's not federal, the LFC is entitled to a 10-day passive review. Okay, so that means they get to look at it, review it for 10 days before it can be posted. Okay, that's by statute. They have that authority, and if there's some sort of emergency where the agency needs that 10-day period to be waived, they can ask for that to be waived. I'll talk about that here in a little while when we talk about the waiver process. Okay. But anyway, either after those 10 days or for other types of documents, then it goes to posting. So we have a team of posters in the office. All of the principal analysts can post bars and journals and all that stuff. So everybody gets a day and they are responsible for posting that on that day. However, we try to avoid posting items that they have reviewed. Sometimes if people are out, it's we kind of have to make exceptions to that. My kind of rule of thumb is ideally we have 4 different people that review every submission, including me. But I want to see it. If we have to duplicate 1, that's okay. So if we have to duplicate 1, so it's like 3 people, that's okay. So the minimum is 3 people see everything, ideally 4, and usually it's 4. So just to make sure that we have those multiple levels of review on everything to make sure that it's correct and submitted and done right. Okay. So then last, if there was a general fund allotment form, which is usually accompanying OPUD 4 forms for general fund non-recurring appropriations, after we post those, the allotment forms are sent over to Financial Control Division for processing because they're the ones who actually keep control of the cash and send it to you after the budget has been posted. So that's what the review process looks like. So now let's get into bars. Like I said, the most complicated and involved type of budget management document that you will submit to us. Okay, so again, a bar is a request by an agency to adjust their current year recurring operating budget, right? Their budget that is found in section 4 of the budget bill. And that's according to authority granted by the legislature, either in the GAA, and it could be either general to all agencies or specific to that agency. Some agencies that have those lower levels of budgeting set up that we talked about this morning, like department level budgeting, they can do what I call internal bars. And that's where you're adjusting a budget at a level that's lower than the P code level. So basically, maybe you're moving some budget in between 2 10-digit department codes or something like that. Those agencies can do completely on their own and do not need to be approved by DFA. And so you can just go do those yourselves. However, any adjustment that's to a P code level budget has to be submitted to DFA. And that's because the legislature appropriates your budget by P code, right, by program. So any sort of adjustment to the P code budget as it appears as it appears in House Bill 2 needs to be approved by us. Okay. And like I said, the LFC has a 10-day passive review of all P code bars except those that are exclusively federal funds. Sometimes, you'll submit a bar that is increasing, other state funds and federal funds because it has an other state funds match or something like that. So in that case, it's still subject to the 10-day wait, right? It's only exempt if it is exclusively federal funds. Okay. And I call it a passive review because the LFC does not have to actively approve the bar. Basically, they just have 10 days in which they can possibly raise objections to it and delay it. So, but if that doesn't happen, then at the end of the 10 days, we can post it. Okay. An exception here, a very notable exception, if we have folks here from the courts, because a few years ago, the courts started receiving lump sum of budget authority in the GAA. In other words, their budgets are not broken out by expenditure category in Section 4. Courts submit BRFs, where every other agency would submit a bar. Okay, so we do still want to see the necessary backup for what the court is trying to do when they submit a BRF for their operating budget. But we'll talk more about that when we get to the BRF section at the end of it. But all this other backup stuff still basically applies. It's just that they do a BRF instead of a bar, and it's not subject to the 10-day wait. Okay, then there's some different types of bars, basically 4 different types. So there's a budget increase, which of course, as the name would imply, is a request to increase your budget according to granted authority. As I talked about this morning, this is never general fund. Okay, you could never do a bar to increase your general fund. A budget decrease, which is obviously a request to decrease your budget. These are fairly rare, but you can do them. The most common example that you might use a budget decrease for is to decrease your federal budget. Like say you got notice from your federal granting agency that for some reason you're getting less federal money this year than you thought you were going to, or that you originally set up your budget for. And so you want to decrease your budget accordingly so that you don't overspend it, right? And you want to match it with the actual grant award. That's maybe the most common reason why you do a budget decrease bar. Category transfer is a request to transfer budget authority from one expenditure category to another expenditure category. So from the 200s to the 300s, or to the 3s to the 4s, or something like that. Not to the 500 category. That is more strictly controlled. You can only move money into or out of the 500 category with basically expressly granted explicit authority. Okay, it's usually just 2, 3s, and 4s. And then the last type is a program transfer. That's a request to transfer budget authority from one P code to another. So in some limited circumstances, agencies are allowed to move from one of their programs to another program. But this is usually limited to specific agencies and or programs that are explicitly lined out in the House Bill 2 in the GAA. So it's not just everyone. Okay. And of course, if you're doing this, you're moving both sides of your budget. So you have to remember to transfer both revenues and expenditures if you're having a program transfer authority. But again, program transfer bar. But again, that's fairly rare, and only rarely can agencies have the authority to do that. Okay. Don has a question here. So what would an example of bullet point 2 be? Do you mean the internal bar? Yeah, okay, there you go. Lori answered that for you. Yeah, so Lori answered for you, Don, but like, so basically some agencies, like say the Environment Department, just because I know their budget fairly well, they have a P code that's water protection, and then underneath that P code they have a couple of departments, like they are bureaus, like Groundwater Quality Bureau is one 10-digit department code, and Surface Water Quality Bureau is another 10-digit department code. Because those are within the same P code budget, they can do their own bar to move some budget authority from Groundwater Bureau to Surface Water Bureau. So because we don't need to see that, because it does not affect their master controlling P code budget. So that's what I mean when I talk about a P code, or excuse me, an internal bar. It's at that lower level of budget that DFA does not control because you can't really see it at the lower level, reflected at the P code level. Okay, so what's the statutory authority for bars? So the process for doing bars and what they are is found within the State Budget Act statutes that I showed you earlier towards the end at 6/3/25 through 23 through 6/3/25. Okay, so that's where you can find them if you want to actually see the statutes for it. And everything that I'm talking about today is found basically grounded in that. But it's also important, if you have these special revenue funds, it's important to review, like I said this morning, the statutes for them. Because these funds have language in the statute, and this language will often dictate what authority the agency has to increase the budget from this fund outside of what is explicitly stated in the General Appropriations Act. So there's a couple of key phrases that you were looking for here when you look up your special revenue fund statutes. So the first one is money in the fund is appropriated to the department. This phrase means that you have broad authority to submit increase bars from that fund. Okay, basically it's saying that the legislature, in creating these statutes, they automatically appropriated money to the fund through this statute. You don't have to get permission from them every time you want to spend something from that fund. Okay, the opposite of that is the second phrase you see there: money in the fund is subject to appropriation by the legislature. So here, for these funds, you do not have any authority to request increases beyond what is specifically allowed in the GAA for that fund. And that could be the general bar authority that applies to every agency, or it could be specific authority in the GAA that applies to you or a specific fund. Okay, but you can't just do it willy-nilly. Okay, now these are the two most clear phrases to look for. Unfortunately, not all funds have very clear phrases and language like that. So if you're looking at your statutes and you don't see these and you're not sure what sort of authority you have, just reach out to your analyst and we'll look at it for you. We'll even get our lawyer involved if we're not sure, but we'll get a read on your statutes for you and help you out. So just reach out to your analyst if you find yourself with unclear or vague language. So, like I said, within the GAA, there is authority for bars. And I talked a little bit about this morning, but let's get into the weeds now. Okay, so I'm using some section labels here, but please keep in mind that the section labels, as in what numbers they are, can change slightly from year to year, depending on how many sections the legislature decides to throw in House Bill 2. So just keep in mind that the bar authority sections, they're usually towards the back, but make sure that you're actually looking at the current year's bill to know what section you need to reference. Okay, so on the left here, you see the first section, that's section 3I, so it's towards the front, and it's all pretty much always the same. And there's language in 3I that allows agencies with excess revenue from these sources, okay? Board of Finance loans, other acts of the legislature, gifts, grants, donations, insurance settlements, refunds, or payments in revolving funds. If you have something from those sources, you can use 3I to request an increase to your budget for that revenue. Now, this is most commonly used as the authority for federal grant increases, thanks to that word grants there. You can also use it if you have a grant from somewhere else, from like a nonprofit organization or something like that, that also covers it. Okay. But I do like to give a word of caution here, because I have seen it in the past where it really seems like agencies are not sure what authority they have to submit a bar. And so they will do what I call magic 3I, in that they will put 3I on the bar form and just kind of hope for the best. And we'll look at it and be like, no, 3I does not cover this requested increase. So just be careful. It is not as broad as some agencies sometimes think. So just do be aware of that, please. On the right, you get into the current current fiscal year bar authority section. So this year in the 2023 GAA, it's in section 12. So like I said this morning, that's specific authority to certain agencies to request budget adjustments for the remaining of the current fiscal year. So for this year's GAA, this section applied to the rest of FY23. FY23 is now over, right? We're in FY24. So this section is now expired. You can't use anything from this section to do a bar anymore. It's all done. Okay. But at the bottom there, you see an example of what this language would look like. Okay. You see the Board of Veterinary Medicine. So it identifies the agency, identifies a dollar amount limit, $100,000, identifies the revenue source from other state funds, and then the purpose, right, to make disbursements from the Animal Care and Facility Fund. So there, I also identifies the fund to qualifying animal shelters. Okay, so all of those things should be identified in the language. So the next section is going to be after that. So this year it's section 13, and this is bar authority granted for the following fiscal year. So in the 2023 GAA, it's for FY24. So that's the section you should be looking towards now. So this establishes both general authority that is granted to all agencies to request budget adjustments in the next fiscal year, and specific authority that's granted to certain agencies like the prior year section. Okay, so here you mainly want to look at sections, subsections C and D for the general authority. So subsection C gives agencies authority for category transfers. Okay, again, among PSNB contracts and other, so the 200s, 300s, and 400s, not the 500s. Okay, why not the 500s? Because again, that category is reserved for what we call non-reciprocal transfers, or just sending money to another agency, no strings attached. So if an agency could do that and basically just be like, we don't want this part of our budget for whatever reason, we're going to send it over to another agency, it would be like the executive branch making its own appropriation and, giving free money to some other agency, right? So that's why the legislature doesn't allow that, unless they specifically say it's okay. Subsection D is authority for agencies with appropriations from other state funds or transfers to request increases up to 5% of the amount that's budgeted in section 4. Okay, so this is commonly known as the 5% rule, or the 5% limit. So in other words, if you have $1 million in your other state funds appropriation, you could use that $1 million as authority to increase your budget by 5%, which is $50,000, right? You could increase your budget by $50,000 in that fiscal year. So again, if you do not have broad authority to request increases from those special revenue funds from your statutes, this is basically what you're limited to, is your 5% authority. Just remember that other state funds and fund balance are grouped together under the other state fund column. So just remember those two go together. And if you're an agency that has both other state funds and transfer appropriations, the 5% authority is limited to each source separately, not combined. Or you can't go, one way or the other and use your transfers budget to increase your other state funds budget, or vice versa. Okay, they are kept very separate and not combined. And then after that, you've got subsection E, and this is a list of authority that's granted to certain agencies by fund, program, or purpose. So there's a list of items that looks very much, looks very much like the Board of Veterinary Medicine example you see at the bottom of that. Basically just repeat it again, but for the next fiscal year instead of the current fiscal year. Okay. And then do note that blank program transfer authority to all agencies is rare. I would say it's basically dead at this point. There was a time, if any of you have been around for a few years, or actually several now, I'm trying to remember, I believe it was 2016, 2017-ish, when the legislature actually did grant program transfer authority to all agencies, so they could adjust their budgets between P codes as they wanted. That is no longer the case. They are very restrictive about that now. I don't see that happening again anytime soon. And so to get that program transfer authority, you have to make a very specific request. And even then, I would say probably 3/4 of them are denied. So keep that in mind. Okay, question here from Alejandra. What time frame do agencies submit a request for subsection E? That's a great question because I'm going to talk about it right now. So you might think, well, I would really like to have some of this special bar language, right, in subsection E. How do I do that? So here's the process. So in the fall, we'll issue guidance to agencies for submitting bar authority requests to be considered for inclusion in the next session's General Appropriations Act. So you're going to submit your language requests with a short justification as to why you want them to both DFA and LFC. This year, that'll be done in BFM in our budget system by October 1st. So never too early to start thinking about what sort of budget adjustment authority you might need that's specific to your agency. Both DFA and LFC will recommend bar authority for inclusion in the actual budget bill. Although keep in mind that the LFC does draft the bill, they tend to have more influence in this area than we do. Although we try, we try, but they kind of have the final word on bar language. So keep that in mind. Like I said, program transfer authority, even if specific, is difficult to get approved. But one thing that can help, not just for program transfer authority, but for any type of budget authority, budget adjustment authority that you're requesting, that's to offer a maximum amount. So saying, okay, the such and such program can request budget increases from other state funds up to $1 million or up to 500,000 or something like that. That at least shows that you don't want to go crazy with your budget. You just might need this extra little bit, and I think that helps. It's no guarantee, but it can help. So you've got your bar authority and you're good to go. You're ready to submit your bar. What do you need to do? So here are all the components of a complete bar submission. So first, like I said, there's the bar form. That's in Excel. Okay, there's your budget journals. Every bar is going to need budget journals, either 1 or 2, depending on the type of journal. We ask that you print out copies of those from Share. And again, all of this backup documentation is going to be converted into one PDF, please. The bar narrative, so that's just the narrative justification for the bar, why you need to do it, what the funds will be used for, and some other questions like that. There's a template for that. I'll be going over all of this here in more detail in the next slides, but this is created in Word, again, included in that backup PDF. And then there's other backup documentation that you might need to submit, and this is going to depend on the type of bar. So here are some things that could include, okay, maybe not all of these, but some of them. So a copy of specific statutory authority. By that, I mean, is it specific in subsection E of House Bill 2, or is it a special revenue fund? Are you using one of those authorities to do this bar? So if it's general authority, if it's 3I, then you need to put 3I on the form, but you don't need to print out a copy of page 5 from the budget bill that has 3I on it and include that. That's okay. It's our job to know what 3I means, so that's okay. Just need to cite it and we'll take it from there. But if it's a specific authority to your agency, please do include a copy of that. If it's a federal bar, you should include a copy of the federal grant award and the budget worksheet. If you're using the 5% rule, you should include a 5% worksheet that shows how much of that 5% authority you are using as part of this bar. Share reports that show the budget availability for a category decrease. So if you want to move $500,000 out of the 200 category, then you need to show us a share report that says you've got that much budget left to actually move it out. And otherwise it would error out, right, if we tried to do that. And then last, budget projections. These are always helpful, especially for category transfer bars that show the need of the bar or the impact of the bar, what the effect will be. And again, I'll be talking about budget projections at the end of this afternoon's session. There's a bar checklist that's on our website, so that it's what you can use to make sure that you're completing your submission, and also covers some of the other steps and everything, just to make sure that you've got everything correct. So make use of that. Okay, so let's talk about how to complete the bar form itself. So if you've been around for a while, you might have noticed that we sent out a new bar form. Now it looks a lot like the old one, but we did make some improvements, I think. We turned all the sections where you need to enter in data or numbers or what have you in yellow, right? So you know you need to go enter stuff in the yellow sections. And also we put in some formulas and some drop-down menus to hopefully kind of limit the selections that you can have in certain spots to reduce the number of errors on the bar form. So I think that's been working pretty good so far. So hope you make use of that and it continues to work well. So some of these spaces are pretty obvious, but you see how I have it filled out here as an example. So like the initiating org or agency, that's your P code. Sorry, you have your agency name, and then under that, the program name. So you have your P code and the name of whatever that is. So this is Game and Fish Bar. And so I put in P717, that's Conservation Services. Bud Ref and class for the Section 4 budget for that year. We'll be talking more about Bud Ref and class a little bit tomorrow morning, but just know for now that it's the same for everything in Section 4 for a fiscal year. So this year, everything in Section 4 is 124 as your Bud Ref or budget reference, and the class code is H0000 for your class code. And those stay the same for a year, and then they basically add one number or one letter in class code. So next year, the Bud Ref will be 125 for Section 4. Next year, the class code will be I0000. It's my goal to retire before we get to Z00, because I don't know what happens after that. I think I'm just going to make it, so we'll see. So note the format of the fund and P code there. We did take out the agency, so because that was a little redundant. So in that yellow box, kind of in the middle bottom left there, you see fund P code. So that's where you have your fund number that you're doing the bar in, and the P code number. Appropriation unit code, that's the like the category, the expenditure category. That's what the top half here is, the expenditure side. So you've got your 2s, 3s, 4s. See, this one here is the 300s. So the label on the left there automatically populated to contractual services. And then on the right side, you see the yellow boxes where you can enter in the revenue category. So for example, this one is a federal bar where they want to increase their federal budget by $500,000. So they put that under federal funds. You put in the CDFDA number if you have one for the federal increase, and it automatically pulled it over to the amount increase column. Okay. Why do we have both if they refer to each other? Sorry, Eric, what do you mean by both? Oh, Bud reference in class. We'll get more into this tomorrow as to what they mean, but basically a class code is specific to the type, the appropriation. When we talk about non-recurring appropriations, you'll see that every type of non-recurring appropriation has its own class code. So that's a way to distinguish appropriations from each other. Whereas the budget reference is an indicator of how long or the time frame that an appropriation is valid for. So like for this one, everything in section 4 is Bud Ref 124. That means it's recurring for fiscal year 2024. But you can also have non-recurring stuff that's valid for 24 months, and you'd have a Bud Ref of 92324. But yeah, so that's basically why they're different. So class is more of like identifying appropriations, whereas Bud Ref is when's that appropriation valid. Okay, so also on this form, don't round or truncate numbers, just use the full numbers. Make sure you include your positive and negative lines in the transfer bar. And then, like I said, you'll need to fill in the revenue side there on the top right, because it'll auto-populate into the increase and decrease columns. So one other thing here on the left side, you see share appropriation budget journal. So make sure that you put in the journal number for the appropriation budget journal, right? Your expenditure side journal number should go in there. And if this is a category transfer journal, then that's probably the only one that you have. But the bottom side here is the revenue side. So you see in the top left there, revenue budget journal. So if you're doing an increase like this example is, then you want to make sure you put in your revenue budget journal ID. And then down, fill out the bottom left with the revenue information, your revenue account, fund P code, and increase, etc. So make sure you get that in there. The top right, statutory authority. So we made this a drop down now. So you have several options of current authority. So current fiscal year 2024 authority to select from. Of course, we couldn't cover absolutely everything with that. So if there's something else that applies, there's an other, and then over on the right, you can identify it, what it specifically is. So that might be a certain item number in subsection E, or it might be a statutory fund that you're citing. You can type that in there. We couldn't cover every possibility, so there's that option. Bar action, that's your type of increase, decrease, or transfer. Federal funds, so you're only going to check that box if it's exclusively federal funds and it's not subject to the 10-day wait. So that's the only time that you check that box. And then the bottom right there, you don't do anything there because you can see that's how that's for our use as the bar works its way through our submissions process. Then we sign off on it. And just so you know, I didn't talk about this earlier, but our submissions, our review process is now totally electronic. We had to do this, in about a week, just like everybody else, right? When COVID started, right before this, we were still on paper forms of bars. And if you were around then, we had like 7 different colors of paper bar forms, which was really annoying. We were like 20 years behind. But necessity prompted us to change everything to electronic in a week. Now we just move things between different folders on our shared drive, and so from one step to another, and it works pretty well. And so obviously we will never ever go back to paper bars. You don't have to worry about that. And then last, of course, make sure that your CFO or designee has signed the form down there at the bottom. So the next part is the narrative. Again, this is the narrative description of why the bar is necessary and what basically your justification for doing it. So we have templates available, and these are available on our website on the budget adjustment request tab that I showed you this morning. So make sure you use the correct narrative. We have different templates for each type, budget increase, budget decrease, or category transfer. We don't have a separate one for program transfers just because they're pretty rare, but you can use the category transfer one and just adapt it as needed. Something we're also working on, kind of a long-term project here, is to redo the narrative and make it a lot better like we did with the bar form, kind of including drop downs and prompts so that you only see questions that are relevant to that type of bar. We're not quite there yet, but we'll let you know, of course, when we get that out, and you can use that from then on. But for now, just use what's on the website. So narrative justification of why the bar is necessary. So be sure to complete this thoroughly and accurately and be specific about what these funds that you're moving around or increasing are being used for. And this is especially important for category transfers. Something that we review very closely and the LFC reviews very closely is moving budget out of the 200 category of, out of PSDB. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that, like I said, I review all these bars, every single bar that comes into our office, I review them for appropriateness, and the LFC will review later, may have questions. Keep in mind that they do have a statutorily granted objection process. So they can, if they object to a bar, they can hold a public hearing on it. Now that is rare. It does not happen that often, but that is their right. So just keep in mind that whatever you're putting into these bar narratives, you should be thorough and accurate and informative, but also keep in mind that, it could be read publicly at some point. So just remember that. Make sure information provided on the narrative matches what's on the form and backup documents, etc. It looks really lazy, but we see this a lot where the journal numbers won't match between the form or and the narrative or anything. So just make sure everything is consistent and matches. And actually, we do have, if you want to see examples of completed bars that are good with no mistakes and have their narratives as well, those are posted on the bootcamp training on the bootcamp website. So there's a couple of full complete bar packets, different types you can download from there just to see as examples. Okay, so the next part, of course, is the bar journals. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of creating journals this afternoon. That is kind of reserved for tomorrow morning when we get into the share system in all its glory. And we'll talk a lot more about every different field on a journal and what does it mean and what you should put in for the different types of journals that you're doing. So keep in mind that's coming tomorrow morning. For now, I'll just want to go over kind of the most important things to keep in mind when you're creating journals for bars. So the budget entry type should always be an adjustment, even if you're setting up a new budget for a federal grant. So keep in mind, it's a budget adjustment request. So it's never an original, it's always an adjustment. And even if it's that new grant or whatever, well, you are still adjusting the federal budget as it appeared in House Bill 2. Okay, so that's why it's an adjustment. Entry type is always a BAR. And then, of course, like I said, use the BUDREF and the class code that's consistent with that year's Section 4 operating budget. Ensure that your increases and your decreases, as well as program transfers, right? Those rare program transfers, they should have a revenue journal and an appropriation journal. A transfer bar needs to be created as a budget transfer journal. So when you create a journal, you have the option of enter budget journal or enter budget transfer. So if you're doing a transfer bar, you should use a budget transfer journal. Makes sense, but sometimes people miss that. Make sure that the journals have been approved at all agency levels to be routed to DFA. This is kind of I think let's say imperfect design with Share 9.2 that went live like 5 or so years ago now, but the system is not that well set up for the DFA level of oversight because I don't think it was taken into consideration. But basically, that means that there's 2 levels of routing and submitting that you have to do. You have to make sure that it is submitted to DFA so that we can first approve it in our queue and then go in and actually post it. We have to do both of those things as of Share 9.2, and that's fine. But we just have to make sure that you submit it to us. Otherwise, we can't do anything with it. So, sometimes we'll be ready to post a journal and we'll go to look for it and we can't find it because it wasn't submitted. So make sure you get it submitted. Okay, and then the last thing here is that very important if you're a larger agency that's doing a transfer bar. So if you're a larger agency that has those department level budgets that we talked about this morning, right? Or talked about a little bit ago with like the multiple bureaus. underneath P codes. So if you're moving, if you have these department level budgets and you're moving from one P code to another P code, you can't decrease the P code without first decreasing the department level budget, because that's the child budget, and you can't decrease the parent budget below the child budget. So what you have to do is first you have to create and post a department level decrease journal. So again, this is something that you have the authority to do yourselves. You just make it entry type AGY. And you do that before submitting the bar to us, and include a copy of your posted department level decrease journal in the backup so that we can see that you did it. If we try to post a transfer and you didn't do this, it will error out. Okay, so you have to do it. So then after, assuming you did that and everything goes well, and we post the bar, then you can go in and you can create a department level increase journal for wherever you moved the journal, moved the budget to. Okay, so then you're good to go after that. So just keep that in mind. If you have these department level budgets, this is something you need to do when you're transferring budget from one category to another or one program to another. If you're a small agency that doesn't do department level budgeting, then you can ignore what I just said. It doesn't matter to you. So now let's talk about the different types of backup depending on the different types of bars. So for federal increase bars, it's a copy of the grant award that details the available funding amount and the period of the award. So we know that you actually have the money to budget what you say you want to budget. Completed grant recon sheet, you see that over there on the end, or sorry, on the right side, that shows any previous established budget from that grant and this bar, the effect of this bar. You can consolidate more than one award into one bar. That's fine if to do them at the same time, but you should do a recon for each, of course, and show us the proof for each grant that you have. For other increased bars, there are a few different types of backup that you might need. So again, if you're using your special revenue fund statutes as your authority to do an increase, then you should include a copy of those statute, a copy of your fund trial balance report. So if you are doing a bar to increase your fund balance, then you should include a trial balance report that shows that you have enough fund balance in the right equity code, like 325900, that you're trying to budget from. I'll cover how to run trial balance reports tomorrow morning. A copy of the MOU or similar document if you're receiving funds from another entity. And then last, your 5% worksheet if you are using the 5% authority to do an increase. And this is what you see an example of over here on the left. So, you say you have a $10 million other state funds appropriation, your 5% limit of that, it's 500,000. So then how much are they using in each bar? Well, they submitted, one bar previously that uses 250 of that, so they've got 250 left. And now they're doing another one for 50,000, so they've got 200 left after this one. So that's how the 5% worksheet works. Again, all of these forms are available on our website. Backup for transfer bars. So here you're going to need up-to-date budget projections, again, showing the need for the bar. Copy of that posted department level decrease journal, like I was talking about a minute ago. If your agency budgets at the department level, make sure to do that and include a copy of that. And then last, a copy of share budget status report that shows the sufficient budget. So if you look at this example here from the, let's see, 549, the tourism department. So this was your budget overview. So over on the right side there, you see available budget. In the 200 category is 796,000. So they could do a bar to decrease their 200 budget by up to that much, right? And maybe they're going to move it over to the 300 category where they don't have any budget right now. So maybe they need something there. Okay, so we need to include this to show us that you have budget available to do the decrease. Otherwise, again, when we try to post it, it will error out. So something new this year is that we're trying to reduce the number of bars that are submitted, and well, we'll see how it goes. That was born out of we reviewed about 300 actually I think more than 300 bars and other documents if you put everything together between April and June this year. That's a lot. We're a staff of 10 plus me. So that was a lot. And we wanted to try to come up with some clear guidelines that would maybe allow agencies to consolidate bars and combine actions onto the same bar so that you didn't have to submit quite so many. Now, we understand that this is probably going to mostly apply when you're getting close to those 2 bar moratoriums that we have during the fiscal year. So we have 2, right? We have one that is during session. So you cannot submit bars unless they are emergencies during legislative session. That's because both us and the LFC are just too busy during session to review bars. So that's one. And then we have another one at the end of the fiscal year from like mid-May to the end of June where you can't submit bars. And that's because it's not great practice to be shuffling your budget around at the same time that you're trying to close out the fiscal year. Okay, so as you can probably imagine, we always get a bunch of bar requests right before those 2 moratorium deadlines. So we're kind of hoping that these guidelines will let everybody kind of consolidate some of their bars and maybe not have quite so many in that time frame. We understand that maybe you can't consolidate bars because something comes up in August and it's just one thing that you need to do a bar for and you need to do it then. That's fine. Okay, but if you can, here are some guidelines for how you can consolidate. So first, kind of the one restriction is that each bar can only contain actions of one type. Okay, so increases, decrease, category transfers, and program transfers. And that's just to keep things from getting too confusing. And also there's different statutory authority for different types. So keep them, each type segregated. So multiple actions of the same type can be included on the same bar, and that includes from different funds or from different program codes or P codes. Each specific action on the bar must be allowed by appropriate statutory authority. Okay, so don't try to like hide things or whatever. Just make sure that everything that you're doing is covered by allowed authority. Every bar involving exclusively federal funds and thus exempt from the 10-day review period have to be separated from the bars of other revenue types. Okay, so keep those separate. But like I kind of mentioned before a minute ago, you can combine multiple federal actions of the same type on one bar. Okay. And then also keep in mind that bars with multiple actions, you can combine them on shared journals. For example, category transfer bar with 5 actions, that only needs to have 1 category transfer journal. You don't have to do 5 journals from them. So that also helps consolidate the journals. Or, example, federal increase bar with 5 grants can combine them on 1 revenue and 1 appropriation journal. Okay. And then, of course, each action on a bar that you're doing has to be clearly identified and justified on the bar narrative. And of course, you have to provide appropriate backup documentation for each action. Okay, so keep that in mind and make use of it if you can. Oops, sorry. Okay, last thing here before we take a short break is the 10-day waiver process. So like I said, LFC has this 10-day review period for all non-federal bars. So usually we have to wait the full 10 days before we can post the bar and share and make it official and actually apply it to your budget. There are some cases where an agency feels like they cannot wait the full 10 days because some expense needs to happen right now. And so agencies can request a waiver to the 10-day review period. So here's the process for how to do that. We did update this slightly this year. We wanted to place a little bit of the onus back onto agencies to do this instead of us, because again, this is agencies requesting this exemption, and it is the LFC's prerogative whether or not to grant that exception, right? Because it's their review period. So this decision is not up to us, it is up to them. We will help facilitate it, but in the end, the agency has to justify it and the LFC makes the decision. Okay, because again, it's them giving up their 10-day period. So if you want to request a waiver to the 10-day period, you're going to complete the bar as normal. Don't check the no 10-day wait box. Again, that's only for federal bars. Submit the bar to us like normal, and you can get a 10-day waiver form from our office manager. You can fill that out. In the meantime, we'll review the bar as normal, and if you let us know that you're going to be requesting this waiver, we'll try to expedite it and get it done quickly. And then when we're done, we'll submit it to LFC like normal. You'll know that our review is done, and then you can submit that waiver form to LFC. And this has to be signed by your CFO. You send it over to LFC, and it has to be signed by their director or deputy director. If they sign off on it, they'll return to you and to us, and then we can post your bar. You should be prepared, of course, to answer questions from the LFC, either regarding the bar's content or why you need to have this 10-day period waived. Okay, so keep that in mind. Be ready to answer those questions. And again, if they approve it, then we'll go ahead and post it as soon as we can. It should be that same day, unless it comes in at 4:59 or something like that. But yeah, that's how it works. We do ask agencies that they not take advantage of this process. Please, do give careful consideration and only request an exemption to the 10-day review period when you really feel like it's necessary. Okay, are there any questions before we take a short break? Okay, not seeing any right now, so let's just take about a 5-minute break and be back here about 2:37 or 2:38, and we'll get started again. In the meantime, if you got any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Okay, 30-second warning. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So now let's move into the other types of budget management documents. So first, how do you budget a non-recurring appropriation? So all that stuff in section 5, 6, 7 that we talked about this morning, and also other legislation like the junior bill. Okay, those are budgeted through an OPBUD 4. These are not subject to any sort of 10-day review by the LFC because all you're doing here is setting up the budget for something that was already appropriated and approved by them. You're not changing anything. These appropriations are lump sum, like I mentioned this morning. Agencies have the authority to establish budget in different expenditure categories as needed, and that's according to fulfilling the purpose of the appropriation. And again, the general exception is that you cannot establish the budget in the 500 category unless basically the language of the appropriation or the purpose necessitates it. So, but generally not. So the key to budgeting these appropriations is the table of budget codes. You see a couple of lines from it there at the bottom of this slide. And this is something that's produced by us after every legislative session and posted on our website. So this is what establishes the Z codes. If I remember from this morning, all of these are identified by a Z code, class codes, and BUD refs for all non-recurring appropriations in the GAA and other legislation. So the junior bill has its own budget code table. This is one that's from House Bill 2. So this is basically where you find all of the relevant information that you need to complete your OPBUD 4 and submit it. So you'll make sure you want to look here and include a copy of the relevant lines when you're submitting your OPBUD 4. So you can see here the Z code for each appropriation, the class code, the BUD ref, the description, fiscal years valid in, the purpose, which is just the language from the bill, source of funding, so these are general fund, and the amounts over there on the right. So these were for 500,000 and 200,000. Okay, you see that for every appropriation in the bill. So here you see the components of a complete OPBUD 4. So of course you've got your complete signed OPBUD 4 form. Again, that's in Excel. Then you've got your other stuff that's a backup. Not as much of a bar, but you do have some things you need to submit. Your budget journals. Of course, you're setting up a budget here, so you're going to need to have both a revenue and an appropriation journal. The budget entry type should be original, say not adjustment, because here you are actually establishing a new appropriation budget, and the entry type should be OPBUD 4. Okay. You should include copies of the appropriation line from the table of budget codes, like I just mentioned, and then you might need some backup that's dependent on the type of appropriation. So if it's a general fund or a computer system enhancement fund, which is section 7, or in rare cases, the tobacco settlement fund, in those funds, you're going to need a complete signed allotment form. Okay, and we'll talk more about allotment forms in a bit. Copy of that PCC certification letter. Like I said, if you have a section 7 appropriation that's subject to the PCC process, then you need to include a letter from the PCC saying that we have cleared this amount of the budget to be of the appropriation to be budgeted. Trial balance report, if you're appropriating from fund balance or if you're budgeting from fund balance, that's pretty rare on these, but it can happen. And the documentation that any contingencies in the appropriations have been met. So it's important to read all of the language that's associated with the appropriation, because sometimes they have certain contingencies tied to them before you can actually budget it. The most common of these is related to passage of another bill. So sometimes what will happen is the legislature will start a separate bill apart from the budget bill that creates a new fund or creates a new program or something like that. And maybe the first version of a bill will have an appropriation in it. And then that bill will get to House Appropriations and Finance, and they'll strip that appropriation out. Why do they do that? Because the governor can only line item veto bills that are appropriation bills. So if you take the appropriation out of it, then she can't line item veto the bill. She can only say yay or nay to the whole thing. So that's why all these bills that are established new programs, new funds, etc., are passed without any appropriations in them. Now, often what will happen is the appropriation will get dumped into Section 5 of the House Bill 2, because there's no getting around the budget bill being an appropriation bill, right? So put all the appropriations in there. At least the governor can only line item veto that bill, right? That's what happens. So you'll often see that these appropriations are contingent on passing some other bill or some other bill being enacted, okay? Contingent on enactment of House Bill 163 or whatever, okay? So you have to show that that bill passed and was signed by the governor before you can actually budget that appropriation. That's the most common type of contingency. There might be some other ones that the legislature stuck in, so good to know those, because you have to prove that you've met that contingency before we can budget it. So now how do you complete the Op Bud 4 form? So first slide here, this is just a picture of what most of the Op Bud 4 form looks like. And then there's more details on the next slide. But most of these fields here are very self-explanatory, pretty easy to fill out. Basically, either you know all this or you're pulling it from the budget code table, right? Because has the Z code, the Bud ref, the class code, all from the budget code table, the amount. Basically, the only thing that you have to decide is on the left side. Again, you get to set up what expenditure categories you're putting it in. Okay. And then on the bottom of the form, you see this Section 6 certification. This is something that's very important, but only if you're budgeting an appropriation from Section 6 of the House Bill 2. So if you'll remember from this morning, Section 6 is supplemental appropriations that are intended to cover any sort of shortfalls or deficiencies. So if you're doing a Section 6 appropriation, your CFO needs to sign this to certify that you need this money and that no other funds are available, right? Because basically it's the legislature covering a shortfall for you. So you have to verify that you cannot otherwise cover it, okay? But that's all. You only sign that if it's a Section 6 appropriation. We'll often see every agency sign this for no matter what type of appropriation it is. They just think they have to sign it. No, you don't. The CFO signs the top left up there where it says submission approved by. So make sure you sign that one for every Op Bud 4. Only sign the bottom part if it's Section 6. So I kind of already covered a lot of this here. Corresponding info from the table of budget codes. Always sign the top right. Set up your expenditure category budget. Make sure you use the right revenue code. So, many of these are general fund, in which case just use 499105. Your journal numbers. And I talked about the Section 6 certification. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Well, thanks, Sheena. I'm glad you find the slides helpful. Again, if you got any other questions, please feel free to type them in. We have plenty of time. So another part to your Op Bud 4 is an allotment form. Again, these are needed if it's from general fund or the computer system enhancement fund, or very rarely the tobacco settlement fund. I'm not sure if I've ever even seen any non-recurring appropriations from the tobacco settlement fund. but I suppose it could happen. And it's there because Financial Control Division controls the distribution of those funds. So that's why it's on there. So this is also pretty self-explanatory to fill out, very straightforward. You can see basically either the information is obvious or also from the table of budget codes again. On funding source, it's either going to be general fund or other. And if other, then specify it, right? It's either computer system enhancement fund, if it's one of those Section 7 appropriations, or tobacco settlement fund. Allotment distribution type over there on the right, that should be accelerated for these, right? Because for these special non-recurring appropriations, you get all the money at once, as opposed to your regular 1/12 allotments for your Section 4 budget. Okay, so check accelerated for these. Again, otherwise, just use all the same info from the bill and your UPBUD 4 form and the budget code table. Okay, now let's talk about reauthorizations. I showed you one example of this morning from when we were looking at the different sections of the GAA. But basically, sometimes an agency thinks that they're not going to be able to spend all of their special non-recurring appropriation by the end of its life. So for this year, it would be, oh, I don't think I've got $5 million in this appropriation, and I really don't think the way things are going, I'm going to be able to spend all $5 million of it by the end of FY24, right? So by next June. Now, I know that can be difficult because, we're in July and we're already wondering, are you going to be able to spend all this in the next 11 months? But that's a thing, that's a decision that you have to make. And so if you think you're going to find yourself in that position, you can request an extension to the life of the appropriation. And those are typically granted for one additional fiscal year. So if you get that extension, down below at the bottom of this slide, you see an example of what that looks like in the budget code table. So you see it uses prior Z code, so you use the same Z code as the original appropriation, but you use a new class code, new BUD ref. Okay, so it's then the BUD ref is just going to be for that new fiscal year. So you see, for example, this one here, if you look over the right to the language, it says it was extended through fiscal year 2021. And so it has a BUD ref of 9/21, saying this extension is valid through fiscal year 2021. So you budget these via the normal UPBUD 4 process, but after the original budget period is over, you can't do an extension for an appropriation that's still valid. Use the same Z code. And budget has to be for the remaining balance of the appropriation. So you should include a share report that shows the balance of the original period. How much did you have left on June 30th of that original fiscal year? That's how much you can bring forward into the new fiscal year and re-budget to spend. Okay, so almost always these are going to be fund balance as your revenue, because that after the regional appropriation expires, that's where the money will go to. So you're going to be budgeting from fund balance. It's not general fund, and do not send another allotment form, right? Because you already got the money the first time. And we sent it all to you. Remember, it was accelerated. So do not include an allotment form because we're not going to send you more general fund. Okay, you're just using what you already got and didn't spend before the original deadline. Are there situations in which a reauth request can be denied? Yes. These are reviewed by both us and the legislature, just like any other non-recurring appropriation request. And so, that they're, I would say more often than not, they are approved, but there are several cases where they are not. And that's the legislator's prerogative. They might decide that, no, you had your chance. We don't want you to we want to get that money back. We don't want to let that sitting out there, that $5 million sitting out there for another year. So we're going to deny that request. Maybe they don't, maybe they have their reasons for not liking the appropriation or what was originally going to be spent for. So that can certainly happen. I think we denied one last year because there was like $10 or $20 left in the appropriation. So we're not gonna reauthorize it for a year for $10 or $20. So there are reasons why they may not be approved. When is the list of Z code appropriations posted to SBD's portal? So very, very soon after the budget bill becomes law. So it's always a extreme time crunch, you know, especially when we have the junior bill too. We are talking about hundreds of non-recurring appropriations that all have to have to be set up with a Z code and class code and bud ref and all that stuff. So we try to start working on it as soon as the budget is passed, but before the budget is signed, because we have that 3-week signing period, which we can work on that. But we can't do anything about it in share until the budget is actually law. So until it's actually signed by the governor. So as soon as the governor signs the budget bill, those appropriations are valid. And that's when we can send the code table over to financial control and the share team to load all of those Z codes and class codes into share so that you can actually start using them to budget. That takes, so we'll try to post it to our website, you know, within a few days, ideally, of the budget being signed by the governor. And then hopefully we try to do it within a week of the budget being signed, where the codes are all in share, and you can start submitting OPUD forms to budget those appropriations if they are valid in the current fiscal year. So which is usually most everything in sections 5 and 6, unless it's otherwise indicated. So we try to do it as quickly as we can, because we know, you know, those appropriations are valid and you want to budget them, and that we understand that. But it, you know, like I said, it's hundreds of lines of appropriations, so it does take a little bit of time. So I was looking at the questions here. Do we need to include a trial balance for the reauthorization OPUD 4, since it will use fund balance as revenue? Yes, thanks, Tamara. That's a good question. Yes, you should include a trial balance for your reauth, because that way we can see where the money is sitting. So I think Mary Beth answered Danelle's one, so we'll keep going. But yeah, thanks for the questions. Appreciate it. So this is something I wanted to point out. This is something that we created this year because due to the number of non-recurring appropriations that are been out there in the past few years, and it used to be that agencies had to submit separate OPUD forms for every single appropriation. So this year we decided, let's try to consolidate things, and we came up with this multiple appropriation OPUD 4 form. So this allows you, if you've got like 10 items in section 5 or the junior bill, you can budget them all on this one form. So you've just got one line per appropriation. The expenditure side is on top and the revenue side is on bottom. So put them all on both sides and make sure they total up to what they should be, and then create journals to match them. And then you're good to go. You've got one submission for all your different appropriations. So we really hope that that helps out. We've seen a lot of agencies taking advantage of this new forms, and I think that's really nice. So please make use of this. Coming attraction, something that we kind of did a trial run on this year. DFA had about 180 appropriations in the junior bill, which is ridiculous. So we did do an auto upload for them into share using a flat file and this kind of format similar to what you do for a capital project. So that was a success. So we're working on that. We'll hope to roll it out and expand it to more agencies maybe next year. The one hurdle we do have to get over is that, remember that agencies can set up their own expenditure budgets for each appropriation. So we do still need that information from agencies. We can't just do everything on our own, because we don't know without your input how to set that up. But we're thinking about that. We're working on it, and we hope that that really helps us expedite the process in the future. And so just, excuse me, just like the OPUD 4 form, we also have a multiple appropriation allotment form. This one looks very similar to the single allotment form. Really, there's not much difference. You just see you have multiple lines there that you can use for each appropriation. So just make sure you're filling that out and include it with your multiple appropriation OPUD 4 form, right? So that one is that one I think is pretty easy to follow along with. So now let's talk about companions. Now this is a fairly complicated special case, and it doesn't apply to everybody, but it does pop up more often than you might think, especially for some certain agencies. So what do we talk about? What are we talking about when we mean companions? There's two possible use cases for these. First is when an agency transfers funds from a special revenue fund into their operating budget, and they want to increase their other state funds budget, which thereby also increases their special revenue fund transfer. Occasionally it comes from another agency, but often it's just within the same agency. For example, the Environment Department has one P code where they keep all of their special revenue funds, and then they have their operating fund that they actually spend all their money out of in their various programs. So if they want to increase spending from one of their special revenue funds through a bar, they have to do it both in their operating fund and in the P code where the special revenue fund sits, the transfer over from that P code into their operating fund. So they have to do two increases. The other example is when an agency receives a non-recurring appropriation from another agency's special revenue fund, and so they need to transfer from that fund before they can spend the money because the agency can't budget from another agency's fund. You see an example of this at the bottom of this slide. So you see this is an appropriation to MNERD, and it was for the Carlsbad brine well, if you remember that. Literal money pit. But anyway, you see the last sentence there, the other state funds appropriation is from the Corrective Action Fund. Well, the Corrective Action Fund is an Environment Department fund. It's not an MNERD fund. So MNERD has no authority or even no capability and share to budget directly from the Corrective Action Fund. Environment has to set up a budget in that fund to send it over to MNERD before MNERD can spend it. Okay, so those are companions between MNERD and Environment. So the procedure for doing this requires two bars or two OPUD 4s, depending on the type of action. So on one of them, you need budget with transfer revenue and expenditures in the 200s, 300s, 400s as desired. So where you're actually spending it. So in the example below, MNERD is doing this OPUD 4. They're going to receive it in transfer revenue. That's code 499905 from another agency, and expenditures wherever. Okay. And then you need a budget with the original revenue. That's almost always going to be either other state funds or fund balance, and a 500 category expenditure. So the transfer out. So again, in this case below, Environment does this OPUD 4. They set up an OPUD 4 from the Corrective Action Fund, from their fund balance probably, and expenditure category in the 500s to send it over to MNERD so that they can receive it and budget it. Okay, so those are companions. Again, I know these are fairly complicated. If you find yourself in one of these and need some help, please reach out to your analyst and we'll help you through it. Okay, the last type of budget management document that we're going to talk about today is called a budget reallocation form, or a BRF. So these are used for two purposes, one for all agencies and one specific to courts. So for all agencies, this is how you do a change to an established non-recurring appropriation. This is almost always a category transfer. Increases are really only allowed for federal funds. So this is basically you set up a budget for a non-recurring appropriation in some Z code, and you put, it's for $1 million, and you put 500,000 in contracts and 500,000 in other. And now you're like, oh, we actually need to increase our contracts budget. So we're going to, move $200,000 from the other category to the contracts category. You would do that through a BRF. So the other use case for these are courts. Like I mentioned near the beginning of this afternoon session, courts use BRFs as bars since the GAA gives them lump sum Section 4 appropriations. They can set up their expenditure categories as they wish. Okay. These are not subject to a 10-day LFC review. And down below, you see the components of a complete BRF. So again, you've got your BRF form as submitted in Excel. Your budget journals, so the budget entry type is going to be adjustment because you're adjusting a budget, an established budget. Entry type is BRF. And then you create a budget transfer journal for category transfer BRFs. In those rare cases that federal funding you need documentation of that. Just like if you were doing a category transfer bar, you should do a share report that shows available budget on that Z code for category transfer. And then a court that's submitting a BRF for your Section 4 budget. So basically what would be a bar for anybody else. You should provide the same documentation as required for a bar of that type. So increased category transfer. So you should include, your narrative and everything else. This is what the BRF form looks like. It's also pretty straightforward. Again, lots of information that you'll either know or you'll pull it off the budget code table, the relevant Z code, class, and BUDREF. Courts, if you're adjusting your Section 4 budget, you use your P code, class, and BUDREF for that year's recurring budget. And then down at the bottom, there's a box for you to put a brief justification for a change to a non-recurring appropriation. Doesn't have to be anything too fancy or verbose, just a little bit of a sentence or two about what you're doing. Okay. So again, those are BRFs. Those are pretty simple usually. Okay, so the last topic for this afternoon is completing budget projections. So the template for these is available on our website. You see the link there. It's on the bar page. We update the template every fiscal year with new account codes. We had a couple new account codes when COVID hit related to those expenditures. I don't think we've had any since then. So, but they could happen. And then the number of salary hours, the kind of default per year is 2,080. But that can change a little bit, like 2088, depending on the calendar. So these are things that you should be using for your budget management and planning during the fiscal year. Make use of them yourselves. But you also need to submit them to us as bar backup, showing the need or the effective bar. That's mainly for category transfers. And also the budget availability for HR actions such as raises or upper reclasses. Basically, the rule of thumb is, if you're doing a budget action, or excuse me, if you're doing an HR action that's going to be an increase in demand on your budget, then you need to provide projections to us inclusive of that action's effect to show us that you've got the budget to support us. To support that action. You can complete one projection packet per P code, and there's different tabs for each funding source within that P code. The category, there's a lot of different tabs on the projections template. The category tab is a summary roll-up, and that copies information over from the detail tabs. So you should not need to hard key any numbers on the category tabs. And kind of just like the bar form, you're going to populate the yellow areas, whereas the white areas are formula driven and copy things over and populate themselves. So this is what the detail tab of the projections template looks like. You see on the left all the different line items, right? This is obviously not the whole thing. This is just a subsection of the 200 categories of the 200 category line items. So in B and C, that's where you're going to put in your original budget and then any sort of budget adjustments that you did. are doing. E and F are your expenditures and encumbrances from share. You'll need to print the report at the detail level, and we'll show you that tomorrow morning. But yeah, if you do things at the detail level, that's how you get your actual expenditures and encumbrances at that 6-digit line item level. And then column I, projected expenditures to year end. So that's going to populate automatically from data entered on the salary projections tab, and that's what I'll be talking about next. However, in the manual entry is required for the 300s, 400s, and 500 categories. You know, the projections template cannot automatically predict or project what you're going to spend in those categories because it's not as fixed or mandated as, you know, salary is. You got to pay people, right? So you have to enter them in yourself. Hang on one second. So, okay. So I want to show you this first, and then I'll go back to the description. This is what the salary projection tab looks like. You kind of see all the information that you're entering in the yellow boxes there. And over on the right is where it sums everything up and adds up what the costs are. And then at the bottom, this is an excerpt from the payroll tab that shows you the schedule and like the hours remaining, pay periods remaining, etc. So you can find out where you are in the fiscal year depending on today's date and really how many hours you have left or whatever. Okay, so now let me go back to the previous slide. So you're going to complete each field with current HR data for every employee that you have. Class means basically the type of FTE and the position that it is. So it could be perm, term, exempt, etc. Object code is that job's classification. And then you enter in their annual salary, and then the hourly wage will auto-populate depending on the number of hours. Okay, you enter your remaining pay hours based on the current data. So again, you look at the payroll schedule tab to see where you are and enter in the remaining hours. Then your insurance cost per pay period, depending on insurance plan and salary. And then it's going to take all that information that you entered in for the employees on that tab, and it's going to project out the remaining cost for each line item in the 200 category over in column S. And that's then brought back and used to populate the projections column here, column I, on the detail tab. Okay, so it automatically projects out what your expenditures are, or projected expenditures are for the year end. Question from chat: are we pulling the information on E from the GL? I believe that's one way that you can do it. The way that I'm personally, well, if you have your own way of getting it, then fine. I believe you can get it from the GL. The way I'm most used to doing it, and back when I used to do this for the environment department, which has been 10 years ago now, I would run a budget overview report at the detail level, and that would give me my expenditures in every line item, and that's where I would find it. And I'll show you how to do a budget overview report tomorrow morning in module 3. A few notes here on vacant positions. So, you don't necessarily need to put full cost for them. So you should enter remaining work hours based on when you plan to fill the position. So maybe you're going to fill it a month from now or 2 months from now. Just figure that out and put that in. Or if you have no plans to fill the position, if you're tight on budget, and you can put in 0, and then it'll zero it out. You won't have to, excuse me, you won't have to budget anything for that position for the rest of the year. You should enter in a salary for a vacant position based on an estimate of what you plan to pay them. Of course, that can change, but do your best. And if you're not sure, then just default to midpoint of the salary range, because that's what we always kind of use as your default estimate. And then last, you should use single coverage to estimate insurance costs. Again, obviously, you don't know what type of insurance that prospective employee is going to have, if any, but just to put in something, put in single coverage, and that'll help build in some possible insurance costs for that vacant position. All right, and that brings us to the end of module 2. Do we have any questions before we wrap up for today? What time tomorrow, and can you send me the link? So module 3 will start at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And yeah, Joey, we'll send you the link. So the modules tomorrow at the same time as today, 9 for module 3 and 1:30 for module 4. Any other questions? Again, there's I think I mentioned this during bar training, but there are lots of supplemental documents to help you do bars on our website on the budget adjustment request tab, like a guide to current year budget authority or bar authority, a list of like 30 or so common bar errors that we run into. So that's something you can look out for. A matrix that we developed last year that shows basically every type of bar or other document that you might need to submit and what the authority for it is and what's needed for it, the backup and all that stuff. So please take a look at the budget adjustment request section of our website and make use of the resources available to you there. Oh, thanks. Yeah, Nicole, if you don't have the slides yet, they were attached to the invites, but Nicole was on it and they got the current slides updated on our website. So they're on the boot camp tab of the website. So if you don't have them for today or tomorrow and want to get them, you can get them from our website. Yeah, I'll try to get the recordings by Friday. They take a little bit more time, but we'll get them on there as well. Thanks, Miranda. I'm glad you appreciate it. I'm glad you liked it. Any other questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, seeing none, we'll let you head about your day. So thanks everyone for being here. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll see you again back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock for module 3. And I will stick around for a few more minutes here. If any late breaking questions come to you, just feel free to type them in chat. Thanks. Um, Jerry, yeah, if you're doing a BRF that involves federal funds, then that's certainly fine. If you have a specific example that you want to send your analyst, we can work through it with you. Well, thanks, Jerry. Diego is an all-star, so glad he's been helpful for you. For the annual salaries is this 2080. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the projections lately. Let me see if I can find that out. Told it's 2080.